global fame with One Direction, selling more than 70 million records, and then scoring #1 hits on his own with songs like Strip That Down, which was written by Ed Sheeran, and had recently released a new single called Teardrops. So this is very unexpected news.
And if you want to carry on watching Newsnight, please turn over to BBC Two or watch on iPlayer.
Do stay with us here on BBC News for all the latest headlines in the US and around the world from the team here in Washington.
I'm Sumi Somaskanda in Washington, and this is BBC World News America. Trucks carrying humanitarian aid enter Gaza as Israeli strikes intensify in the north. Lebanon says more than 130 airstrikes hit the country in the last 24 hours, while Israel ramps up its campaign against Hezbollah. Ukrainian President Zelensky outlines his victory plan against Russia, and the U.S. announces another large tranche of aid for Ukraine. Very warm welcome to this new extended hour of World News America. We're bringing you a full hour of live news and analysis from here in the U.S., the U.K., and around the world. Now, the U.S. ambassador to the UN says they are watching Israel's actions in Gaza to make sure they don't have a, quote, policy of starvation in the northern part of the Strip. She made the remarks to the UN Security Council. Israel has denied previous accusations that its military is surrounding parts of the north and preventing food aid from getting through. It comes as trucks carrying humanitarian aid enter the war-torn region for the third day in a row, following a 2-week period when the United Nations said no aid had entered northern Gaza. The deliveries follow a warning from the U.S. that it would cut military support to Israel if it didn't boost aid efforts in the Strip. Rhea Davis is following all of these developments from Jerusalem.
Well, in the last 3 days, there's been a significant but small increase in the amount of aid getting into northern Gaza, perhaps as a response to that very strongly worded letter from the American Secretary of State and the American Defense Secretary outlining the fact that Israel's military offensive in Gaza was having unacceptable humanitarian consequences. So about 50 trucks have gone in through the Erez crossing in northern Gaza today to the north, to the Jabalia area. It's still way short of the 500 trucks or so a day that the aid agencies are needed at least. But Israel says, it is sending in aid. It accuses Hamas and other groups sometimes of stealing that aid. But clearly not enough is getting in. The United Nations has again said that the situation in northern Gaza is completely unlivable at the minute. We've heard more accusations and criticisms from some of Israel's closest allies. Again, the Americans have told Israel they're keeping a very close eye on what Israel is doing in northern Gaza because the humanitarian situation must be taken into account. I think at the end of all of this, Israel is probably going to have to rethink its military objectives in Jabalia in northern Gaza. Israel can't simply go in there now, almost flatten parts of the area in pursuit of the remaining Hamas units. It has to think about the impact on the 300,000 or so people who are living there. Israel says it is encouraging people to leave, but Médecins Sans Frontières are amongst the many agencies who've said it's impossible for people to leave. Some people are being shot at apparently by Israeli troops when they try to leave, and even when people do get to so-called designated safe areas, they're finding themselves at threat, and sadly there have been bombings and shellings where people have been killed in these so-called safe areas. So perhaps a rethink for Israel of its military objectives in northern Gaza, although it does say that it is continuing to kill Hamas fighters. Apparently 50 members of Hamas were killed by Israel in Gaza in overnight activity. So that is why Israel is doing what it's doing. But clearly, given this criticism in writing and also on the floor of the UN from the United States, from the British, Israel defending itself, but it might have to rethink things in northern Gaza.
Now, adding to what we heard from Wira there, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees says Gaza is now a kind of, quote, unlivable wasteland, adding that around 70% of its infrastructure has been destroyed. Our special correspondent Fergal Keane has been reporting on the intensifying attacks in northern Gaza near Jabalia. Because Israel is not allowing international journalists, including the BBC, independent access to Gaza, he sent this report from Jerusalem and a warning. It contains distressing scenes from the start.
Not a burden, but a duty. To the dead and those left after them. They'd fled here hoping it might be safer. In Gaza City, 13 members of the same family killed by an Israeli airstrike.
I took out my younger brother at the last moment. He told me, I heard Mum and Dad reciting a prayer. I don't know how we can go back to our home in the north without my mother or father or brothers.
The Abu Nasser family were from Jabalia. This is what they fled from. A brother mourns his sister. It's a horrible crime here, says the civil defence officer. Many dead are being pulled out of homes and from the streets. Jabalia is cut off by the Israeli army fighting Hamas. But the horrors being endured here are emerging. They run to save life and because they fear airstrikes. Bodies piled into ambulances. All ages. Kamal Adwan Hospital in Jabalia is facing a constant stream of casualties. There is a dire humanitarian crisis. Israel is accused of refusing or impeding up to 90% of aid to northern Gaza in the last month. From Jerusalem, I spoke by phone with the hospital director. What is the situation now for you in the hospital?
We are talking about collective punishment for the health system in the Gaza Strip. Consequently, we urge the world to intervene and impose their humanity over the Israeli army, to open humanitarian corridors that allow the entrance of medical tools, delegations, fuel and food, so that we can provide humanitarian services for the children, newborn babies and patients who are in need.
America has warned Israel it may cut arms if it doesn't boost the aid allowed into northern Gaza. Israel says it's addressing US concerns. And its soldiers blame Hamas for the crisis facing civilians, saying medical facilities are used to launch attacks.
של האוכלוסייה האזרחית בתוך מרפאה, בתוך מתחם אזרחי, אנחנו נרדוף את המחבלים האלה ונמצא אותם בכל פינה.
In Gaza City, they're digging for the dead. What a child must witness. They desperately want this to stop. But no, they cannot make it happen. Fergal Keane, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Now, elsewhere in the region, cross-border fire between Israel and Hezbollah continues. 90 missiles were fired into Israel in the last 24 hours, according to its military. And in Lebanon, 138 strikes were reported in the past day. The Israeli army said its warplanes struck dozens of what they say are Hezbollah targets in the southern city of Nabatea. The airstrikes killed the local mayor and 15 others. The Lebanese government said this was a direct attack on civilians. Rescuers have also been searching for survivors today in the village of Kana, where the Israeli military says it killed a Hezbollah commander. Our senior international correspondent Orla Guerin sent this report from Beirut.
Terror from the skies. My God, what have they done, he says. They've destroyed Nabatea. Then one more Israeli airstrike. Carpet bombing a city that's still home to about 1,200 people. Ahmed Khel, on the left, is the mayor who stayed to look after them until his last breath. He was pro-Hezbollah, but he was a civilian. The mayor was killed here in the municipality building with 5 others from his crisis unit. They were meeting about aid, according to the Lebanese government. Israel says it struck dozens of Hezbollah targets in Nabatea. A UN official says it killed 4 members of a relief team the UN worked with for more than a year. And 1 hour away, this was the picture in Kana. The name might be familiar. Israel killed at least 100 civilians here when it shelled a UN compound in 1996. It bombed the town again in 2006. In every war, we get our share of devastation, says the mayor here, Mohammed Kershet. Today, the destruction is massive, terrifying. We still have missing people trapped under the rubble. And there is so much rubble now. Israel admits causing all this and says it eliminated the local commander of Hezbollah. The army published this video today showing its bombardment of southern Lebanon in what Israel calls a war of self-defense. Orla Guerin, BBC News, Beirut.
Let's talk about the latest developments with David Satterfield, former U.S. Special Envoy for Middle East humanitarian issues and former U.S. Ambassador to Lebanon. Ambassador, good to see you again. Thanks for joining us this evening. I do want to start with the situation in Lebanon, as we were just hearing from our reporter who's based in Beirut there. We heard that 4 aid workers had been killed, according to the UN coordinator for the country, who spoke to us a little bit earlier. And he told us people across the country are in danger. We're hearing about these strikes and counterstrikes between Hezbollah and Israel. Where is this escalation heading?
Well, that's exactly the question. Look, whether we're speaking about the situation in Lebanon or on another scale entirely, Gaza, the question here is, what's the end game? What's the strategic plan beyond simply continuing kinetic action? Now, we've been very clear, the United States, particularly in the letters sent Sunday by Secretaries Austin and Blinken, that the concern displayed by the U.S., by the international community, about where this is going has to be something that Israel focuses upon and responds to. In Lebanon, there is absolute support for Israel's right to defend itself, its citizens, its north, against the unprovoked attacks that have gone from Hezbollah into Israel since October 8th. That is well understood. The position is very clear. But where does this ultimately go?
Right.
What is the price paid for the continued kinetic pressure upon Hezbollah? That price can become far too much for Israel, for the United States, for the international community ultimately to bear, which is why now, not a week from now, not a month from now, the issue of how is the targeting being done? What are the objectives? What is the trade-off between legitimate Hezbollah terrorist targets being struck?
But Ambassador, if I could just jump in there, because you know these are all questions that the U.S. has been asking, indeed. But it appears that all of these calls for de-escalation are not being heeded by either side, of course. So, what is the avenue now for the U.S. and for other members of the international community to try to move both sides towards de-escalation?
Well, the avenue is twofold. First, the kinetic actions to defend Israel against a terrorist organization, which, as I said, opened up on October 8th in an unprovoked fashion with attacks that have gone on every day against Israel. That pressure is important, but it must be paralleled by the utmost attention to care for civilian populations. That's not being done.
So you're saying Israel is not
a diplomatic process.
Okay,
Both
diplomatic process. But is Israel disregarding, do you think, the civilian population in this targeting of Hezbollah, as it calls it?
It is very clear that the civilian casualties incurred in Lebanon have gone beyond levels which are appropriate even for a campaign against a terrorist target that has embedded itself amongst civilians, and a different calculation needs to be applied.
Would you say that the same applies to Gaza, where we've seen tens of thousands of civilians, from what we understand of organizations on the ground, also killed, and now a dire situation in the north?
Well, in Gaza, The question is, what is the strategic gain for Israel with each day this campaign continues against what I would call the strategic losses for Israel? And it's certainly my assessment, I think it's the assessment of the U.S. government, that the time for an end to the kinetic campaign came many, many weeks ago, and that Israel is not gaining anything real by this inertia, if you will,
So why does it continue, you think?
strikes that generate civilian casualties. What is needed is a ceasefire, release of hostages, and the beginnings of a political horizon to provide for a day after.
I guess, Ambassador, last question. I imagine that there must be a deep sense of frustration in the Biden administration that that assessment is not shared, apparently, by Israel or Hezbollah, of course, or Hamas, for that matter.
I won't use the term frustration. I would say there is very, very significant concern. You heard it from our ambassador to the UN today in New York, and you heard it in the text of the letter that was sent on Sunday. Deep concern about where this is going. What is the end of this? Where is the day after?
Okay, Ambassador, always good to get your perspective here on BBC News. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to bring you some breaking news that has come into us now. Liam Payne, the former One Direction singer, has died at the age of 31. Local police say the British musician was reportedly found dead outside of a hospital in the Argentinian capital, Buenos Aires. And let's see now if we can bring up some of these pictures of the hotel outside where we believe that this has happened. And our correspondent, Nikki Schiller, is following the latest, Nikki, as we try to bring in some of these pictures. There they are. These are live scenes from Buenos Aires. And Nikki, you're our correspondent, of course, following the latest on the story. What do we know about what happened?
Yes, Sumi. So this happened in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, in an area of the capital called Palermo. Now, police are telling us that Liam Payne, of course, famous around the world for being part of the boy band One Direction, has died after falling from the third floor of a hotel. And our American partner CBS has spoken to the Director of Emergency Medical Services, confirming the news that Liam Payne has died after falling, what they say, onto an interior patio of the hotel. They say that the ambulance arrived 7 minutes after they got the call. So this happening in Argentina. As you said, we've seen the pictures from outside the hotel. These reports came in from Argentinian press first, and then the police have issued this statement saying that he did die after falling from the third floor of this hotel. Now, as I mentioned, Liam Payne is known around the world as being part of that boy band One Direction. Now, they were formed on the UK version of the X Factor back in 2010. That programme, of course, Simon Cowell, one of the judges. Now, originally, the boys that were in that band, so that's Harry Styles, Niall Horan, Zayn Malik, Louis Tomlinson and Liam Payne, didn't make it through as individual artists, but Simon Cowell and one of the other judges, Nicole Scherzinger, decided to put them together as a group, and they formed One Direction. Now, on the show itself, they didn't win the X Factor. They came third, but they were probably one of the first of the boy bands that really used social media and YouTube to become famous. And they posted lots of things, which meant that they didn't only become famous in the United Kingdom, but around the world. And they did world tours. They had a couple of albums selling millions and millions of records, 70 million records. And of course, they also used Spotify and other music services, so they had billions of streams as well. They were massive, touring the world, getting lots of adulation from girls screaming outside their hotels. And then in 2016, they decided to take a hiatus, and they haven't been back together since then. So some people feel they've split up, but they technically are still on a hiatus, but they went on to do their solo careers. Of course, the biggest to come out of that, Harry Styles. But Liam Payne also went on to have a solo career. He released an album of his own in 2019, a couple of singles, Polaroid and Familiar, you may know. He also went on to have a relationship with the Girls Aloud singer Cheryl Cole. They had a son together called Bear. He's now 7 years old, born back in 2017. And Liam in Argentina. Now, we know that he posted on Snap today. I've seen that video. He's sitting in what we assume is his hotel, having a breakfast. He was talking about how he was going to go and play some polo, looking very relaxed, I have to say, in that video. We don't know what he was doing in Argentina, although we do know that one of his former bandmates, Niall Horan, was on tour in Argentina earlier this month at the beginning of October. So he may have been there for that and stayed. But what we do know is police telling us that Liam Payne, 31 years old, who was in and famous for being in the boy band One Direction, has died after falling from the 3rd floor of a hotel in the Palermo area of the Argentinian capital, Buenos Aires. Sumi.
It is indeed shocking news, as we're looking at these pictures. As I described a little bit earlier, these are live pictures, Nikki, we're seeing from Buenos Aires outside of that hotel, as you mentioned. We don't know at this moment more details about what happened, but we do have a statement that we have been given here that I'm just going to read out now that says, here, if I can find the statement just ahead of me here, the British musician, composer, Liam Payne and guitarist and ex-member of the band One Direction died today after falling from the 3rd floor of a hotel at 6000 Costa Rica in the Palermo neighborhood. Again, this is in Buenos Aires. These are the pictures we're looking at. The statement goes on to say, in the afternoon hours, officers from police station 14B were dispatched to the Hotel Casa Sur after a 911 call in which they were informed of an aggressive man who may have been under the effects of drug and alcohol. And there is one more part of the statement, Nikki. It says, when officers arrived, the officer in charge said he heard a loud sound in the inner courtyard of the hotel. When officials, they found a man who had thrown himself from the balcony of his room. This statement is a little bit rough. This has been translated, of course, from Spanish from police in Buenos Aires. But again, that statement that we've just received in saying that officers did respond to this hotel at 6000 Costa Rica in Buenos Aires, in the Palermo neighborhood. And this happened in the afternoon hours. And again, police here saying, this is a translated statement again, that they had received a 911 call. They were informed of an aggressive man who may have been under the effects of drug and alcohol. And when they arrived, they heard a loud sound in the inner courtyard. Nikki, again, we are waiting for more information, but just remind us again of what we've been seeing coming across the wires and, of course, social media as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually getting a few more details from our correspondent Ione Wells, who's in Argentina. She confirming what you have also confirmed from that police statement, but also saying that the head of emergency medical services has been talking on local television there, saying that Liam had suffered, and this is a quote, very serious injuries incompatible with life as a result of his fall, and there was no possibility of resuscitation. He added that Mr. Payne was taken to a local hospital after the call was made to the emergency services on Wednesday evening. So we are getting a little bit more detail coming in that he was taken to hospital, but those injuries, the local head of the emergency services saying, were just so catastrophic there was no chance of resuscitating Liam Payne. So him in Argentina at this hotel. As I said, only a few hours ago, he had posted on Snap a video of him looking very relaxed and having a late, as he described, breakfast at 1 o'clock, and also talking about how he was going to go out and play polo. As you say, there has been a lot of reaction on social media, and there will be, because there are still a lot of fans of One Direction and the band members who were in One Direction. They had a massive following back in 2010 when they were formed on the X Factor. They were one of those bands that you can look back at, a bit like in the 60s we had the Beatles and there was the Beatlemania. Well, there was definitely One Direction mania during the early 2010s when they were formed. And then they travelled around the world and they had lots of hit pop songs, very catchy pop songs, and they appealed to lots of particularly young girls who followed them and went out and went to see them on tour. They were formed, of course, as I mentioned earlier, by Simon Cowell on the show X Factor here in the UK. Originally, Liam Payne had actually auditioned before as himself when he was 14, but then he came back in 2016. And they were all very, very young, 16, 17, 18-year-old lads who were on this programme and then put together in that five-piece band by Simon Cowell and Nicole Scherzinger. And then they created that and sold over 70 million records. And then, as I said, they went on their hiatus in 2016, and a lot of them went off and did solo projects, of which Liam did do that. He had his own solo album. And as I mentioned, most famously, Harry Styles probably is the biggest of those One Direction lads that went on to do other things. But Niall Horan has also been on a world tour and has been in Argentina. Zayn Malik went off and did other things, as did Louis Tomlinson, the other band members that were in One Direction. And of course, we also have to remember that Liam Payne has a young son, a 7-year-old son called Bear, who he had with Cheryl Cole, very famous here in the UK as a singer. She was part of the girl group Girls Aloud, also formed on a reality TV show, and they have that son. So our thoughts, of course, will be going out to his son and to Cheryl as well at this very sad news. And of course, the fans of One Direction will be and have been posting on social media with their shock, and just on my WhatsApp from people saying, oh my God, I can't believe this. And I think that's the reaction that certainly here in the newsroom, when the first reports came out, people were shocked that this has happened. And I think that will be the overriding thing that all of those fans of One Direction have got, that is that shock of this sudden death. He's only 31 years old. And as we say, we don't know all of the circumstances around what happened. We've had that statement from the police that, as you said, we've had translated, but we do know from all of the reports that it does seem that he fell from a 3rd floor of this hotel, and the local emergency medical director telling local television that it was onto a patio and that those very serious injuries were, and I quote again, incompatible with life. Although he was taken to hospital, obviously they were unable to resuscitate Liam Payne, and that will be the shock and the shock news, Sumi, that that the fans of One Direction will be feeling at the moment.
Yeah, Nikki, shocking news indeed. All right, Nikki Schiller bringing us the latest updates as he's getting there. Nikki, thank you very much. And we're going to bring in our BBC News correspondent in Sao Paulo, Ione Wells. She is following the latest for us on this as well. And Ione, just so you know, we're looking at some live pictures from Buenos Aires of the scene outside of that hotel. We see a crowd gathered behind cordoned off tape, and we see police and other authorities there, flashing lights, clearly a big police presence. Ione, tell us the latest that you're hearing.
Well, that's right. There has been certainly scenes gathering near this hotel in Palermo, which is an upmarket neighborhood of Buenos Aires. Emergency services were called there earlier on Wednesday evening and found Liam Payne. He was then taken to the Casa Sur hospital in Palermo, but emergency services said that he had suffered very serious injuries. They were incompatible with life as a result of falling from the 3rd floor of this hotel, and that, in their words, there was no possibility of resuscitation. Now, we are still finding out more details about some of the circumstances surrounding this event, but it has come as a huge shock to his fans. He was only 31 years old, and this is someone who has been in the public spotlight really for most of his adult life, even his childhood too. He first auditioned for the X Factor in 2008 when he was just 14 years old. He came back again in 2010, that time aged 16. And it was there where, despite being eliminated as a solo artist, he was joined with other contestants, Niall Horan, Harry Styles, Louis Tomlinson, and Zayn Malik, to form One Direction, going on to be one of the biggest boy bands in the world, one of the most successful groups known internationally. And I think it is safe to say that he will not just have huge fans, of course, back in the UK mourning this news, but also a huge fan base here in South America as well. One Direction were enormous. He obviously went on as well to do some solo music work along with his co-stars in that band. All of them sort of went their separate ways after taking a indefinite hiatus from 2016. So I think there is certainly going to be, I think, lots of public displays of mourning, both in Argentina, but also across the whole world as the result of this news.
Ione, we are seeing, as we heard from Nikki, some of those reactions coming through already, a global superstar, as we know. As we continue to look at these pictures, Ione, if you could just tell us again, remind us what we know at this point about the circumstances of what happened to Liam Payne.
Well, there are still a few details about what exactly happened, but what has been released by the emergency services is that they were called earlier on Wednesday evening to a hotel in Palermo, which is an upmarket neighborhood in Buenos Aires, the capital of Argentina, where the star appeared to be staying. He was only 31 years old. Emergency services found him at the scene and he was rushed to a hospital in Palermo called Casa Sur. And despite sort of efforts to try to resuscitate him, emergency services have said that the injuries he suffered as a result of this fall from the third floor balcony were incompatible with life as a result, and that there was no possibility of resuscitating him. Emergency services have continued to release different statements about this, but they have confirmed his death. They haven't yet confirmed what may have happened, what may have caused this fall, but certainly this has come as a huge shock, as I was discussing there, to his fans around the world, given how young the star was, but also just his international celebrity status, the fact that he's a huge international star, not just in the UK where he's from, but also here in South America and North America, of course, as well, where he'll have many fans grieving this news tonight.
We've seen that police statement that we were mentioning, Ione, a little bit earlier, as we continue to see that massive police presence there on hand and the crowds gathering there in Buenos Aires. They mentioned the area, as you did, this Palermo neighborhood, and the police response. We are, of course, waiting for more details. Much of what happened is at this point not exactly clear. But Ione, you were talking a bit about his career, of course, as a superstar, global superstar. I mean, tell us more about the last few years since One Direction, what Liam Payne has been doing. And you said, obviously, he had a solo career as well.
That's right. So the group decided in 2016 to take what they defined as a sort of indefinite hiatus. Now, that was something that saddened a lot of their fans. They were obviously known as a group. That's what brought them to fame, but they all kind of went their separate ways after 2016, all embarked on different types of solo career. Liam Payne himself went on to release some solo singles, a debut solo album as well. He also sort of branched out into other fields of work as well. He did some modeling. He was an ambassador for certain fashion brands. He also had, of course, a huge following on social media, as all celebrities do nowadays. And he used that as a platform really to talk about certain things in his life. For example, fatherhood. He was the father of a son, Bear, who he had with Cheryl, who was, of course, at one point a judge on The X Factor. They were in a relationship for a time. They had a child together named Bear. He's talked quite openly about fatherhood on some of his social media platforms. He's also spoken openly about his struggles with mental health, about depression, about anxiety, about some of the struggles that he has experienced as a result of the fame that he was brought to at such a young age. And as I mentioned before, despite auditioning for The X Factor when he was just 14 years old, it was 2 years later when he was 16 that he really rose to global fame. That was after he auditioned initially as a solo artist, but went on to form One Direction with those 4 other contestants. Now, all of them have gone on to have their own solo careers, so they haven't been working together as a group for some time now, but I'm sure this news will come as a huge shock, of course, to his bandmates as well, who I know certainly were sort of in touch, and we certainly saw some appearances of them getting back in touch over the years. So I'm sure that will come as a huge shock to them as well.
Nikki had been mentioning, our colleague Nikki Schiller, that Niall Horan had actually been in Argentina as well for a performance. I just want to, again, go back to that police statement to remind people of what police here have said, that Liam Payne has died. The statement that was sent to us from police in Buenos Aires, this is a translation of that statement. I'll read it out here. It says, the British musician Liam Payne, composer and guitarist and ex-member of the band One Direction, died today after falling from the 3rd floor of a hotel at 6000 Costa Rica in the Palermo neighborhood. In the afternoon hours, officers from Police Station 14B were dispatched to the Hotel Casa Sur after a 911 call in which they were informed of an aggressive man who may have been under the effects of drugs and alcohol. I just want to point out here that we, of course, don't know yet what this statement is referring to, if the statement is referring to Mr. Payne or not. But it goes on to say, when officers arrived, they said they heard a loud sound in the inner courtyard of the hotel, and then they had found a man who had fallen from the balcony of his room. So that's the statement that we have received here at the BBC from officers in Buenos Aires, those who responded to the scene. You know, Ione, coming back to you, I mean, you were saying obviously this will come as a huge shock to many people. What are some of the reactions that you're starting to see trickle in on social media?
Well, certainly lots of fans I've seen paying tribute to him, just some in complete shock, really, at the fact that this has happened at such a young age. As I say, he was only 31 years old. And despite being somebody who has been in the public spotlight for so long, it's sometimes hard to remember that how young he was, because he has been in the public spotlight for so long, because he's been famous since he was a teenager. And so I think many fans are hugely shocked at this news. Some were still hoping, of course, for a One Direction reunion in the future. That's something which some of their sort of core fans were really hoping for. This news obviously will come as a particular sad result to them. I've seen also tributes coming in from some of the major sort of music platforms as well. MTV, for example, paying tribute to the star. Many deeply, deeply shocked by this news. We haven't yet heard statements, of course, from some of his family. I know we were talking earlier about the fact that he has got a young son, Bear, who he had with Cheryl Tweedy, who was formerly a judge herself on the X Factor, but also, of course, a singer in Girls Aloud. And I think certainly we will be expecting more tributes from those closer to him once they have been processing some of the news that has just come in this evening. It's come as a great shock, as I say. As you mentioned there are reports by Billboard, music online platform, that one of his former bandmates from One Direction, Niall Horan, was also in Argentina playing some of his solo music there. So I'm yet to confirm whether he is still in the city, but that seems to be what Billboard are suggesting, that he was there on tour. Unclear whether or not the two had actually met up or whether he had been at events like that in his time in Argentina.
Is an important question, of course, Ione. As we continue to look at these pictures, you can see the crowds have continued to gather there at the scene. Do we know at this point, we understand, as you said, there's been some reporting that his former bandmate was in Argentina performing. Do we know anything about Liam Payne's presence in Argentina at this time?
Not very much at all. I mean, as is quite normal when celebrities obviously go away, whether it's for personal reasons on holiday, if it's not for sort of a tour themselves, they tend to keep a fairly private profile. So I hadn't actually seen before this evening that he had been in Argentina, but it seems that he was there visiting, of course, and staying at this hotel in Palermo. It's not clear whether he was just there for holiday, whether he was going to be working as well. But certainly that concert from his former bandmate Niall Horan was earlier this month, I think on around the 2nd of October. So that was, well, about just under 2 weeks ago now. So Liam Payne, it's not clear, as I say, why exactly he was in Buenos Aires, apart from just perhaps to visit for a holiday. He was staying in Palermo, which is a sort of upmarket neighborhood of the capital, Buenos Aires. It's not clear whether he was just staying there on his own or whether he may have been visiting with anyone else or any friends as well. As I say, we are yet to still see statements from anybody sort of close to him, friends, family members, for example, who may want to pay their own tributes to him once they have had the opportunity to process this deeply shocking news.
Indeed, Ione, and we are seeing some tributes that have been coming in. I've seen on the social media platform X, formerly Twitter, Paris Hilton calling the news, quote, so upsetting, and saying, quote, sending love and condolences, to his family and loved ones. And she added, quote, R.I.P. my friend. And we're seeing other people also on social media saying, sending their condolences, and sending Jedward on X saying here, who he also appeared on the X Factor, saying they were sending, quote, strength to Cheryl and his son Bear and all the One Direction family. And as you said, Ione, I mean, it's important to note that Liam Payne, so young at the age of 31, and also does have a young son.
That's right. He does have a young son, and it was something that he spoke very openly about on his public platforms, about being a father, about both the challenges, but also the joys of that as well. And he had that son with his former partner, Cheryl Tweedy, who was very famous herself, of course, as being a singer from Girls Aloud, but also was later a judge on the X Factor. They had a short relationship, but one where they did have their son Bear together. We haven't yet seen a statement from her or any other of those sort of close to him, friends, families, partners, former partners, for example. But I think many will be thinking of his young son at this time. As you say, he is incredibly young, only 31 years old. He's been in the public spotlight now for really kind of nearly 2 decades, having risen to fame as just a teenager. So I think many people have known him, really felt like they've kind of grown up with him. I know sort of that his generation certainly first saw him as a teenager, now will be a similar age themselves. And I think that's why this is particularly shocking news for people of that generation especially.
Indeed. All right, Ione, thank you so much for those updates. Ione Wells for us, reporting on the very latest. And let's go to our correspondent, Azadeh Moshiri, who is in London for us, tracking the latest that she's seeing there. Azadeh, we're continuing to look at some of these live pictures from outside of the hotel. You know, this really will come as a shock to millions of fans. As Ione was just saying, a generation of fans.
Absolutely. Sumi, Ione wasn't overstating this. Liam Payne, alongside his band members in One Direction, not only became huge X Factor stars, they became one of the biggest bands, boy bands in the UK, credited with partly bringing back that resurgence. And the sort of attention that they attracted at the time was very reminiscent of Beatlemania. You had a lot of young, adoring fans, huge groups. They became huge social media sensations as well. And they were really young when this happened, to the point that some of them talked about how difficult it was to deal with that limelight, with that level of attention. But they are considered national treasures here in the UK. And of course, they've had a huge global impact. They've been on tours and concerts around the world. So, of course, this is an impact that's going to be felt. The band itself sold 70 million records. And there's a reason that all of these tributes are coming in. And Sumi, for him to have died at 31 years old, he's young. It's a shock. And the fact that there are so many questions around the circumstances, it's going to be something that's particularly shocking to many viewers around the world and many One Direction fans, of course.
Indeed, Azadeh, we're seeing these pictures again with police and also emergency authorities there. What looks to be the entrance of that hotel in Buenos Aires, as we're continuing to find out more details. Just remind us, Azadeh, what we do know at this point about Liam Payne's death.
Well, at this point, we know that the police were called to the hotel because they they were called in because of apparent suspicious activity. They thought that there were reports that he was potentially under the influence. And once they arrived, they reportedly found the body on the patio. Now, this has been confirmed to several affiliates, including our US media partner, CBS. And Sumi, it's also worth reminding the audiences that while we've been talking about the fans, while we've been talking about his bandmates and what a huge treasure he is to the UK itself, he does also have a family. He at one point had a child with Cheryl Cole, another very famous actress here, rather singer here in the UK, who also at one point was a judge of X Factor US, so maybe known to US audiences as well. And they together had a child called Bear. He also did recently have another relationship, and so a lot of people that he's left behind.
Yeah, Azadeh, we're still watching those pictures, and just a reminder of what police have said here. You referenced this, but they said in their statement that that he died, Liam Payne died after falling from the 3rd floor of his hotel. They referenced these pictures we're seeing here from this hotel in the Palermo neighborhood of Buenos Aires. And they said it was the afternoon hours that they were dispatched there after a 911 call. And as you referenced, Azadeh, they said they were informed of an aggressive man who might have been under the effects of drug and alcohol, and that when they arrived, they then heard that loud sound in the inner courtyard of the hotel. We're continuing, of course, to track any of the latest details that come to us. But Azadeh, I mentioned that we saw some reactions coming in. What have you been seeing coming in, the reactions to this very shocking news?
Well, we've seen a reaction from Paris Hilton, who was one of the first people actually to go on social media and react to the news. She went on the social media platform X, also known as Twitter, and called the news, quote, so upsetting. She said she's sending love and condolences to his family and loved ones. And she added, R.I.P. my friend. There's also another social media post by Jedward, who also appeared on the X Factor. They'll also be known to Eurovision fans as well, but they're also a product of that competition show. And they have said they were sending strength to Cheryl. That's Cheryl Cole that I referenced earlier, his former partner. And they've also sent their condolences to Bear, their son, and also to all the One Direction family. Now, of course, this news has only just come in and been confirmed in the last hour or so. So we are expecting more tributes to come in because, again, you can't overstate what an impact Liam Payne and his bandmates have had on the industry.
Okay, Azadeh, thank you so much for those updates. Again, just for our viewers, Liam Payne died at the age of 31, former band member of One Direction, as we've been saying. We have heard from police there in Argentina, Buenos Aires, that he fell from his hotel, the third floor of his hotel. And these are the pictures that we're looking at. And we are going to continue following the latest details as they come in to us. We do have continuous updates on our website at the moment, bbc.com/news. We're going to move on to some other news, but we will continue to come back to this and bring you updates as they come in to us here at the BBC. So we're going to do some other news now, and I said come back to that breaking news. But with 20 days to go, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are vying for voters' attention through a mix of campaign rallies and media interviews. And Vice President Harris has been sitting down for an interview with the conservative network Fox News, where she's been drawing a contrast between herself and President Joe Biden.
My presidency will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's presidency. And like every new president that comes into office, I will bring my life experiences, my professional experiences, and fresh and new ideas. I represent a new generation of leadership. I, for example, am someone who has not spent the majority of my career in Washington, D.C. I invite ideas, whether it be from the Republicans who are supporting me, who were just on stage with me minutes ago, and the business sector, and others who can contribute to the decisions that I make about, for example, my plan for increasing the supply of housing in America and bringing down the cost of housing, addressing the issue of small businesses, which is about working with the private sector to bring more capital and access to capital to our small business leaders, including my plan for a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers and for small businesses, extending the tax deduction from $5,000 to $50,000.
We've heard a lot about.
On Wednesday, Fox News aired an all-woman town hall with Donald Trump that was taped the previous day. He was asked about the strict abortion laws being imposed in several states, and he praised the Supreme Court for ending Roe v. Wade.
Like Ronald Reagan, I believe in the exceptions for rape, incest, life of the mother. Strongly believe it. You know, you have to follow your heart. Some people don't. It's a very small percentage, but you have to follow your heart. But you have the exceptions. But what we were able to do is, through really the courage of 6 Supreme Court justices, we were able to do this after years and years of turmoil. Now it's back in the states. The states are voting for it.
Okay, let's talk about the latest now with our panel tonight. Democrat strategist Amisha Cross, communications director at the Education Trust, and Republican strategist Maura Gillespie, former advisor to the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, and founder of Blue Stack Strategies. Great to see you both tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Maura, I want to start with you. What did you think of the message that we've heard from the former president, specifically aimed at women?
So I think that today's town hall, despite the fact that it was geared towards women, only one question that really came up about, the issue of abortion and women's health. So I thought that was a bit interesting. Not that the women voter bloc is just siloed to one issue. Obviously, economy is important, housing, what's happening in our schools, all those things are important across the board. But I don't think he really addressed women in his answer. He talked about what he did and what people wanted him to do, and he got it done. He called himself the father of IVF. And so I don't think that if this is an effort to try and appeal to women and explain why he would be a good president for them, not to be someone who swoops in and saves the day, but what policies he wants to put forward that would be, beneficial to women in this country, I don't think he hit the mark there. And I do think that there is an opportunity for Republicans down ballot to maybe fill in that gap and remind their constituents why they should be reelected in just a matter of weeks.
Amisha, what do you think? Because we have spoken to representatives from the Trump campaign who have said, look, we know there is a gender gap between how men are trending at the moment and how women are trending, but Donald Trump represents policies that will be good for women.
I think that it's hogwash. This isn't a trend at the moment. Republicans and men broadly have been leaning towards conservative and have been voting conservative, with the exception of Black men, in large part for the better half of the past 5 decades. This is not new. What is new is a Donald Trump who has decided to, with a wink and a nod, appoint Supreme Court justices who he knew would get rid of Roe v. Wade, in addition to a guy who has been found with credible cases of, or allegations of rape as well as sexual abuse for up to 24 women, in addition to being found liable for rape, and someone who has on more than one occasion lied about abortion rights, saying that Democrats want women up to 9 months to be able to have abortions, and that's happening across the country. That's flat out a lie. This is someone who is okay with women on their deathbed not having the decisions made by their doctors, but having decisions made by Republican legislators, whether or not they are able to maintain their reproductive rights, whether or not those doctors can save them in life-threatening situations. Donald Trump has shown who he is to women on multiple occasions, and they should not believe that he is about to change his strike.
So, Maura, coming back to you, I mean, one important question is going to be, how important do you think the overturning of Roe v. Wade, reproductive rights, is actually going to be? Is it going to be a driving issue for voters?
I think largely voters are going to vote on the economy and safety and security. But what I do think that women are thinking about this, for me personally, I think that voting for Donald Trump, Republicans don't have to vote for Donald Trump. They can write in. We have that option. You can vote Republican down ballot. But for me, I'm not going to vote against myself. And I do believe that Donald Trump is only out for himself, and he is not going to be looking out for people, for women, but just anyone really else. His sole focus is what's best for him. And so as a Republican, I can say that because I think it's important to give people the option, the permission structure to vote elsewhere. They can vote for Kamala Harris. They can do a split ticket. They can vote a write-in. I think it's important to remind people that split ticket option is there for them because, again, policy issues that are important to the voters. They may not speak about it in a poll, but once they get into the voting booth, it's going to weigh on them.
Okay, and Amisha, we only have 1 minute left, so just a quick answer if you can. Do you think that some women will choose to vote on issues like the economy or immigration over reproductive rights?
I think that for women voters, which are 54% of the American population, the largest voting bloc in America is women. Women's reproductive rights is an economic issue. Last time I checked, having a child costs. Last time I checked, hospital bills matter. And raising a kid from birth to adulthood is also a cost that is taken into account. Republicans have pushed against financial stability for women, particularly young mothers who are in need of childcare, as well as a child tax credit across this country. And at the end of the day, an economic decision is made when you choose to decide to start a family. That is an economic decision.
Okay. Amisha, Maura, great to speak to you both. We'll, of course, continue talking to you in the lead up to the election these next few weeks. Thank you both so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
We're going to go back to our breaking news now. Former One Direction singer Liam Payne has died at the age of 31. Let's go back to Azadeh Moshiri, our correspondent, who's been following the latest for us. Azadeh, just bring us up to date on what we know.
Well, Sumi, you and I have been looking in the past hour at these pictures of fans gathering in front of this Buenos Aires hotel where Liam Payne has died. Police were called to the scene and found his body after he reportedly was found after falling from the 3rd floor of a hotel there in an upmarket neighborhood there, Palermo. Now, of course, details are still coming in, but this is still a huge shock because he is someone who represented so much to so many. He was part of One Direction, of course, a band that sold 70 million singles worldwide, had known great success after coming in 3rd on the X Factor competition show. And though they did come 3rd, they're arguably one of the biggest successes that show has ever had. And Liam was very much part of that success. The sort of attention they attracted was similar to the Beatles. They had hordes of fans, adoring fans, that was reminiscent of Beatles mania. Now, it all lasted about 6 years before the band then went on an indefinite hiatus as they pursued solo careers. That did include Liam. And it's worth remembering that he wasn't thrust into the spotlight. He, of course, sought it, but he sought it at a very young age. He initially started that X Factor journey at 14 years old. And he has talked about openly with his fans and the media in the past about the impact that had had on his mental health, the struggles with anxiety, as well as his own struggles with alcohol and prescription drug abuse. It's something he's been very transparent about throughout his career, but had still continued to pursue that. So, Sumi, of course, this is something that's going to be a huge shock. A lot of fans are going to be dismayed, and they're going to want to find out exactly what happened. Now, as we've been speaking and as this news has been coming out, there have been tributes that have been continuing to come in. Now, the latest is from a former X Factor contestant, Rylan Clark. Of course, these former contestants are ones that have been reacting very quickly. Now, he said that the death is tragic. In a post on X, he wrote, "He is extremely sad. It's extremely sad news. Very tragic and so young. R.I.P. Liam X." We've also heard from Paris Hilton, who has said that the news is, quote, so upsetting that she sends love and condolences to his family and his loved ones. Sumi, it's worth reminding everyone that he does leave behind a son, Bear, that he had with Cheryl Cole, who was also a judge at one point on the UK X Factor, was also briefly a judge on the US version of X Factor, so may be known. She herself came from a singing competition background and was a member of another very popular group here in the UK, Girls Aloud. And there's also been reaction from Jedward, another group who came from the X Factor competition, who said that they were sending strength to Cheryl and his son Bear and all the One Direction family. Again, Sumi, at 31 years old, this is going to come as a major shock to many, and why we're all waiting for more details to come out.
Okay, Azadeh, indeed, very shocking. Thank you so much for that update. And just a reminder of this news, One Direction singer Liam Payne has died at the age of 31. We have all the very latest updates on our website, bbc.com/news. We have a live page running right now with the latest reactions and, of course, the details as they're coming into us from police there on the scene in Buenos Aires. We'll continue to keep you updated there. And we're back here at the news desk in just a few minutes with an update as well. So please do stay with BBC News.
Hello. Wednesday brought some very heavy falls of